I must admit, this game caught me by surprise. Oh, I'd heard the nice things people had said about it online, how its story and world were poignant and beautiful, but I was woefully unprepared for the brilliance of God of War's narrative. I was struck by the incredible growth and transformation of the two main characters, how their arcs intertwined and affected one another, how father and son struggled to connect and yet desperately clung to each other at the same time, and how Kratos' example of masculinity, while certainly imperfect, is nonetheless beautiful and has much to teach us. So many themes surrounding virtuous masculinity permeate this story. The tale of Kratos and Atreus delves into the motifs of righteous anger versus rage and wrath, true humility versus ego or the denial of one's true nature, the importance of relationships, using your power and strength for the good of others instead of for your own gain or ambition, and the persistent and unrelenting hope for growth, the belief that we can be better than the men we were yesterday. You might find all that a bit surprising. I know I certainly did. How is this hulking brute of a man, whose very nature is to deal death and destruction, an example of authentic, wholesome masculinity? The examples of masculinity we've previously examined on this channel are all far gentler and kinder than this spectacular Spartan specimen. Surely Kratos should be a model of harmful hyper-masculinity. Well, yeah, he was. The previous God of War games followed Kratos on his journey of vengeance, as he sought to destroy pretty much the entire pantheon of Greek gods, brought on by them tricking, backstabbing, and bamboozling him in various ways because, you know, they're Greek gods. They're all a bunch of dicks. I mean, Ares drops Kratos' wife and daughter into his warpath, and then the Spartan kills them in blind rage because killing things in a blind rage is just what he does. Kratos may have been the victim of Olympus' schemes, but he was hardly an innocent one. He became the monster we see in those games because of the choices he made. In particular, because of his pride and his desire to achieve victory at any cost. Old Kratos was motivated almost entirely by the desire for revenge, his guilt and refusal to let go of his failures, and of course, his unyielding anger. However, that trilogy did not end with its protagonist, despite all his crimes and sins, including plunging all of Greece into utter chaos and killing his own father, painted as an irredeemable monster. Instead, its climax gave us a glimmer of hope, showing the audience how Kratos had come to understand the corrupting nature of power and the need for hope to blossom within every human breast. That brings us to the beginning of our story. There's a lot one could speculate beyond what we know for sure about Kratos' journey to Midgard and his transformation from bloodthirsty specter of vengeance to quiet, forest-dwelling behemoth. But the weight of his past could hardly be clearer. After the death of his first family, Kratos' all-consuming purpose was to exact vengeance on those responsible, transforming him into a monster he can never fully escape. And yet, he tries to do so, living as a mortal in the woods of Midgard, taking on an assumedly human wife, bringing a child into the world. Thus begins our observation of Kratos' struggle with humility. To be humble does not mean to think less of oneself than one deserves, but rather to accept one's own strengths and weaknesses, to not be obsessed with one's self-image, to have accurate self-knowledge that allows one to look beyond ourselves, turn outwards, and seek the good of others. Kratos, for the past decade or so, has not been humble. He was terrified of the monster within him surfacing, and thus he distanced himself from the person whom that rage-filled brute could hurt most easily, his son. Kratos loves Atreus, there's no doubt of that, but he was so caught up in seeking his son's survival, on keeping his own nature hidden lest he harm Atreus, that he forgot to teach his son how to live.
What
She knew.
Shall we?
There is so much meaning packed within that single line. One would think, especially in this more primal environment, that the father would be the one to bear the responsibility of instructing the son on how to engage in various traditionally masculine endeavors, such as hunting. Especially a dude like Kratos who could probably kill, skin, and cook a deer simply by giving it a stern look. Even if Kratos did not take sole responsibility for Atreus' education on tracking wildlife, he should at least have been involved in the process and not have to ask his son if his mother had taught him. Assumedly, this family of three has been hunting and foraging for food for the past 11 years, and yet during all that time, Kratos apparently never bothered to take his son hunting even once. Where was he? What was he doing? Those questions largely go unanswered throughout the campaign because they aren't really relevant. What matters is that Kratos simply wasn't there. He wasn't around to see his son grow up, and now with the loss of his wife, Kratos and Atreus are thrust together, yet each of them is still very much alone. This is often what happens when we suffer trauma, regardless of whether others or ourselves inflicted that pain upon us. We turn in upon ourselves. We get lost in our fear, anger, grief, and guilt. We forget that there are others out there who are dying to care for us if only we would give them a chance to do so. Seeing this in Kratos humanizes him, pulling down this incredibly powerful being to the level of any broken man, and setting an example for how to grow beyond these wounds. That's not to say that the process will be easy, quick, or painless, of course. The bond between Kratos and Atreus will develop gradually, and the relationship journey will hardly be smooth. It certainly doesn't start out all sunshine and rainbows.
What are we hunting?
You are hunting deer.
Which way?
In the direction of deer.
As much as I love this clip as a brilliant portrayal of Kratos' character, it also breaks my heart to see a son look to his father, one whom he barely knows, but his father nonetheless, for guidance and instruction, and get brusquely told, "Figure it out, boy." Not that it's wrong of Kratos to tell Atreus that he needs to rely on his own instincts and training to find the deer, but rather that, well, there's a much more fatherly way to do so. There's a big difference between simply instructing and actually teaching, taking time to connect with your pupil and impart your wisdom through that relationship of trust. Kratos and Atreus simply do not have that bond yet, which is why we get moments like this.
There it is!
Hold! What are you doing? Now his guard is up. Only fire. Only fire. When I tell you to fire.
I'm sorry.
Do not be sorry. Be better.
No doubt, seeing Atreus rush toward the kill, heedless of the consequences, reminds Kratos of when he acted in like manner in his past, a memory that causes his anger to flare in true Kratos fashion. Seeing our own vices, especially those we are still struggling to overcome, present in our children, is undoubtedly one of the most infuriating experiences for a parent. And yet, this is not old Kratos. Incomplete though his growth may be, he has become gentler and more patient. There is still a lack of connection in his teaching. He instructs in a utilitarian fashion, telling Atreus what to do, with little if any explanation on why or how he learned these lessons he now passes on. Nonetheless, we see that connection is something desired by both parties. We can, in Atreus' eyes, see how badly he needs his father, how much he seeks his approval. And Kratos, for his part, is not unaware of his son's need to connect with him, and he himself clearly desires that their relationship flourish, but he holds himself back. Fear and guilt are powerful motivators, and their ability to keep us from making ourselves vulnerable, or worse, making others vulnerable by entering into relationship with them, cannot be understated. Not that Kratos doesn't try. He does have wisdom to share, and he wants Atreus to learn what he knows, but again, his teaching methods could use some work.
Why are you doing that?
Too slow. Try again.
Cut it out!
Weak. Again. Again.
Stop it!
Again.
He's not wrong, he's just kind of an asshole about it. It's hard to be gentle on someone for a flaw for which you've been so hard on yourself. Kratos is clearly speaking from experience when he says,
Your anger. You can get lost in it.
and he has Atreus' best interest at heart. That is, he does not want his son to become the man he was. I can hardly think of a more universal experience for a parent than wanting your child to be better than you are, which is, as it just so happens, a major theme, arguably the dominant theme throughout this journey.
Do not be sorry. Be better.
However, as a parent, you also must understand that your child has not obtained the breadth of knowledge that you have, and unfortunately, that knowledge is often won through the errors and failings, the missteps and wrong paths that we take and make as we go through life. There is a distinct parental desire to keep your child from making mistakes, to keep them focused on the goal you've set for them, and to shelter them from the evils of the world. Gradually, all those desires of Kratos are worn away. While their journey begins with the singular purpose of taking Faye's ashes to the highest peak in the realms, it becomes so much more than that, as Atreus finally experiences life beyond their protected forest home. And what an introduction to that wider world Atreus receives, running into desperate cannibals and being forced to kill one of them in self-defense. This is where we get another hint of Kratos' deeply hidden love for his son and his anxiety about losing him.
Atreus!
This is the first time Kratos calls him anything but boy. The gentleness displayed here by the hardened Spartan warrior is remarkable. It speaks of the memory Kratos certainly has when he first took a life, how he knows the experience is one that leaves an indelible mark upon a man, but it cannot be allowed to consume him.
Close your heart to it.
Honestly, it's just beautiful seeing Kratos finally reach out to his son and comfort him. The experience they now share creating a bond that allows this father to do what he was unable to do before. This scene also provides an excellent setup for much of the rest of the journey. As father and son canoe across the Lake of Nine, they encounter many people, both living and dead, who request assistance. While Kratos' focus remains solely on their goal, Atreus, finally experiencing the world so long hidden from him, is eager to aid all those who ask it of them.
It's sad the elves can't work things out. Alfheim's such a beautiful place, but war makes it ugly.
You see with the eyes of a child. In war, a soldier sees beauty only in the blood of his enemy.
It's amazing how little snippets of conversation like this have so much meaning packed into them. We hear in Atreus' comments his idealism, his appreciation for natural beauty, and his desire to simply make the world a better place. In Kratos' response, we not only hear of his past, but also are informed of how he views the world now. He has a singular purpose from which he cannot be deterred, and he will sacrifice everything to accomplish that goal. This is another point in which Kratos will have to grow throughout the course of the story. Having a purpose is incredibly important, to be sure. The lack of purpose is a significant driver of the endemic loneliness for young men today, but rigid, unflinching devotion to that goal is not typically good or virtuous. Not everything is war. Atreus may see with the eyes of a child, but Kratos sees with the eyes of a man who has known nothing but war. He does not yet understand the true purpose of this journey. Instead, he was given an objective, and will stop at nothing to carry it out, just like any good soldier would. Contrast that with Faye's war, as told by Kratos in yet another canoe storytelling hour.
Mother was a warrior. Was she in a war too?
Of a sort, her war was to live on, to brave an unforgiving world alone.
And that's why she has Sindri and Brock to make her the axe?
She had the strength to wield such a weapon, and the wisdom to use it for good. She found purpose in protecting the weak.
This introduces us to another of the story's themes, a theme that pervades storytelling featuring strong characters with any sense of what virtue is. It is the responsibility of the strong to protect the weak. As one of my favorite novels puts it, strength does not make one capable of rule, it makes one capable of service. Kratos clearly knows that his late wife exemplified this ideal, and yet he doesn't seem to believe himself capable of living up to that same standard. That's not really a surprise. Kratos' lack of humility at this point in his life story causes him not to think too much of himself, but rather too little. He believes that Faye simply was far better than he was, is, or ever will be. We tend to think far more of our loved ones than we do of ourselves. That's completely normal and natural. And it's clear from the very start of the story that Kratos did truly love his wife. The tender care with which he treats her body displays that love. And in Alfheim, the reality of this genuine affection is made even more evident. This sequence where Kratos enters the light of Alfheim is just plain stunning. Right away, we see Faye's ashes float away and begin to hear her music. I absolutely love the reoccurring musical themes in this game. The echoing siren-like chorus that accompanies Faye's scenes is hauntingly beautiful. As Kratos chases after the woman he loves, we hear Atreus bemoan his mother's death and being left alone with a father he hardly knows.
You left me here alone. Alone with him. He always leaves. He's never here. He doesn't want me and he never will. I don't know him and he doesn't know me. He doesn't talk to me. Doesn't teach me. It should have been him. Do you hear me? Him, not you.
This reinforces the knowledge we already have, if we've been paying attention, that father and son barely have any semblance of a relationship, but that Atreus, for his part, very much desires one.
Except... I don't mean that. You know I love him. I just wish he was better. I know he can be. So if he tries, I'll try.
When Atreus pulls Kratos out of the light, away from Faye's voice, it marks a shift in how each of them views the other. For Atreus, the act of waiting and fighting all the while increases his fear of being alone, while Kratos witnesses his son's fear that has turned to anger as he waited outside for seemingly ages, terrified that his father had abandoned him. And he learns the strength of Atreus' need for his presence, a fact that the voices in the light did not betray. The two are struggling to understand each other, They have a common goal, yes, but approach it in vastly different ways. The Light of Alfheim scene depicts Kratos' total devotion to Faye, and how that dedication could, even if for a short while, cause him to forget about his son. To this point in the story, Kratos has largely only made any attempt to connect with Atreus when it came time to teach him something. A relationship between father and son cannot be so utilitarian if it is to be genuine and loving. Kratos must learn to care about Atreus himself, not his abilities or discipline, if he is to become a truly good father. Caring for another's mental well-being when your own is so damaged and fragile is an incredibly difficult undertaking, hence Kratos' continued inward-looking nature, which confuses and upsets the expressive, communicative Atreus.
Was she in the light?
Who?
You know.
Oh, she was not there.
Not like you would even care if she was.
Mind your tongue, boy! Until our journey is over, one of us must remain focused. Do not mistake my silence for lack of grief. Mourn how you wish. Leave me to my own.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize.
No. Why would you? You do not know my ways.
I love that in every lesson Kratos teaches Atreus, there is growth for him as well. While Atreus is too quick to judge and thinks he understands his father, believing him to be cold-hearted and uncaring, Kratos gives him every reason to think that.
Now?
Now,
As Kratos says,
do not know my ways.
again, there is a gap that must be bridged by both parties. Atreus must seek to truly understand his father, while Kratos must take up his masculine duty of teaching and instructing his son in his ways and customs. It's no wonder that he had been hesitant to do so before. Kratos' ways aren't exactly the healthiest. His way of living had brought him untold pain and suffering, and caused the deaths of all those whom he loved. If there is one thing Kratos does not want his son to do, it is follow in his footsteps. So why would he bother to teach Atreus his ways, his point of view, and how he perceives and interacts with the world around him? If Kratos viewed himself with true humility, he could have embraced what was good about his customs and manners and raised Atreus with such instructions, but his scars keep him from seeing himself in so generous a light, and instead force him to hide as much as he could from his son, until Faye's death forced him to do otherwise. It's remarkable how central of a role Faye plays in the story without once showing her face. She is the catalyst for the entire journey, responsible for bringing father and son together, enabling them to grow both separately and in relationship, healing their wounds and learning to rely on one another. Indeed, it is their shared love for Faye that begins to truly bridge the emotional gap between them.
In the light, I felt only moments pass. If that is of some comfort to you.
That's good to know. Really.
This is the first time we hear Kratos offer Atreus consolation or comfort just because. There's no practical or utilitarian reason Atreus would need to know that Kratos did not realize how long he had been in the Light of Alfheim. But Kratos reassures his son nonetheless that he did not mean to abandon him for so long. It's a small thing, but so important. Kratos has loved Atreus before, teaching him how to survive and adapt, protecting him and watching after his physical well-being and his ability to simply continue living. But now, he speaks out of a desire to reassure and connect with his son, to strengthen their relationship, and for no other reason. Kratos could have just let it go. The past is the past, after all. But he spoke up because Atreus needed to know that his father truly does care, that he is trying.
So if he tries, I'll try.
It's hard to overstate the importance of knowing that you are loved. Love is meant to be a selfless gift, and yet if it is not reciprocated, or if you are not aware that your spouse, parent, whoever does in fact truly love you, the relationship will struggle to flourish. This is why love languages are so important. Kratos has always loved Atreus in his own way, providing for him and protecting him, and more recently teaching him to survive the harsh world into which they have been thrust. But what our favorite hulking Spartan did not realize until this point in the story is that his son needed to be loved differently, that Atreus speaks a different language of love. His son requires kind words and encouragement from his father in order to know that Kratos truly does care. His father had always cared for him, but now Kratos is learning to show that he truly cares about Atreus, that he wants much more for him than mere survival. The chill in their relationship is beginning to thaw, and father and son are finally beginning to act as father and son should. This turning point also highlights an important lesson taught by Kratos' developing virtuous masculinity. No man exists in a vacuum. We cannot be good men if we retreat into ourselves and become isolated from the world, from those who would love us and are in need of our love. Human beings are made for relationship. And when Kratos is able to begin the process of overcoming his past wounds and bonding with his son for the first time in his life, he provides an example for us of authentic, flourishing masculinity. Of course, the journey is far from over, both physically and psychologically. Kratos and Atreus have a long way to go, both on their quest to the peak and in their pursuit of genuine relationship with one another. The former appears to be nearing its end, as the two are just feet below the summit. And yet, even now, Kratos has a lesson to teach Atreus about patience and preparedness.
Your quiver.
Strap broke when we fought the dragon. It's alright. I can hold it.
Stop. Broken quiver will slow your draw. Pain we endure. Faulty weaponry we do not.
Despite being apparently moments away from what they believe to be their ultimate goal, Kratos takes the time to gently impart his wisdom. This exchange is a sign of how Kratos is warming to his son, now becoming willing to teach Atreus his ways.
Pain we endure. Faulty weaponry we do not.
That's a very fatherly thing to say, isn't it? In this case, I actually do mean that in contrast to motherly nature, which tends to seek comfort and safety as higher goods, but more on that later. Speaking of mothers, however, when the pair re-encounters Freya, Mimir's head in tow, we see that Kratos' desire to share his ways, share the truth about himself and how he has come by the wisdom he now has, is severely limited. Our protagonist at this time simply cannot bear the thought of revealing to his son that Atreus shares a nature that Kratos has taught him to despise, a state of being that the Spartan, not without cause, believes will only bring suffering and death.
You are God.
Leader of the Vanir, once yes, but no longer.
You did not think it important to tell me.
Are you really going to lecture me about that?
In doing so, Kratos once again displays his lack of humility and self-acceptance. Denying who we are simply is not healthy. Growth is not possible if we do not admit that we are starting from a deeply flawed and broken state. Hiding from ourselves, burying our past or our traumas can only delay pain. It cannot prevent it entirely. Eventually, if not faced and conquered, our demons will come for us in one way or another. Dread it, run from it, the past agony arrives all the same. And now for Kratos.
Sickness. Fever has returned.
Atreus begins to fall ill as his human and immortal natures clash. Or rather, his belief that he is mortal clashes with the reality of his godhood. Now, I can't exactly explain the mechanics of this illness or why exactly it's caused by this cognitive and physical dissonance, but that's not really important. What is significant is this. Why did Atreus experience discord at all? The answer, of course, is that Kratos kept his true nature, their shared nature, from him, burying his own past in an attempt to protect his son. The sins of the father have a way of reaching the son, no matter how deeply they are shoved into a closet. Kratos believed that if he could simply sever all connections between who he is now and who he was then, Atreus would be safe from the monster he left behind. Alas, that is not the case.
Freya! Open the door! We need your help! Woman, do you hear me? It is urgent!
I'm still a god. Go away.
The boy has fallen ill! Freya!
Let's pause our analysis of Kratos' failings for a moment to recognize something. He really does love the boy in his arms. The superb tenderness with which he says,
He's ill.
his voice almost quivering with pain and distress, is incredibly moving. This hulking, brutish Greek warrior cares deeply for this boy, to the point that he will finally face the demon he has been hiding from for so long. That is, himself.
Then I must return home, dig up a past I swore would stay buried.
Who you were before doesn't matter. This boy is not your past, he is your son. And he needs his father.
I can't say I entirely agree with Freya that it doesn't matter who Kratos was before. Our lives are continual, unbroken stories, and who we were becomes who we are. But in another sense, I completely agree with her. Regardless of the mistakes we have made, the sins we have committed, and the burdens we carry, we are always called to do the right thing, to grow in virtue, to serve those who need us. Often, adversity is required for us to heed that call. It is typically in times of greatest danger and in the threat of grave evils that men achieve the heights of virtue, bravery, perseverance, and self-sacrificial love. So it is with Kratos. Faced with an unthinkable loss, he is finally able to find his humility, to think of himself less, to accept the reality of who he was without letting his past overwhelm and define him. Before he can do so, though, he needs to leave Atreus with Freya, and giving his son over to the care of another god, a class of being that Kratos doesn't exactly love, wouldn't normally be his first choice. But Freya isn't just a god, she is a mother.
I will keep him safe. That's a mother's promise.
I wanted to make sure we note this moment. Now is not the time for a full discussion of Freya's motherly nature, her choices, and her mistakes, but this line makes it clear that at the heart of her maternal philosophy is one thing: protection for the child placed under her care. Again, more on that later. The scene of Kratos returning home to unearth the Blades of Chaos is one that most movie studios wouldn't dare put in their films these days, because it goes on a solid few minutes without someone yammering on to make sure every member of the audience is aware of exactly what is happening.
So who is he?
Ezekiel Sims. He was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died.
Shut up. Get out.
Only a few words are spoken,
Athena, get out of my head.
and the scene simply lets the audience experience the journey with the character and wonder, what is he thinking? It brilliantly sets the stage for what is to come, as the once bright and vibrant woods turn dark and cheerless in the presence of Kratos' somber mission. This is seemingly our protagonist's lowest point. He has so far failed to bring his wife's ashes to the highest peak, he could not protect his son from the sickness caused by his own nature, and now he is being forced to embrace the weapons he had buried beneath his home in an attempt to entomb the memory of whom he once was with them. And yet, this is the moment where his redemption truly begins.
Pretend to be everything you are not. Teacher, husband, father. But there is one unavoidable truth you will never escape. You cannot change. You will always be a monster.
Every word of Athena's is calculated to cut to Kratos' very heart. We hear in her tone her vitriol and spite, the hatred that she has for this man-turned-god who killed her, her father, and her siblings, who decimated Olympus and who left her land in ruins. How could one who had experienced such suffering and tragedy at the hands of the man in front of her not proclaim that he is incapable of change and will forever remain a brute and a beast?
I know. But I am your monster no longer.
Kratos seems to agree with her, that he is still a monster, that he cannot change. But this line goes deeper than that. Certainly, Kratos has embraced his role as teacher and father, and by carrying out Faye's last wishes, he is proving himself to be a loving husband.
I know. But I am your monster no longer.
These 9 words are not a rejection of all that he has done over the past decade. Rather, they are, finally, an indication that he has accepted who he was, that he is the same man who decimated Greece and all its gods in the pursuit of vengeance, and most importantly, that he can be that man, and yet not become lost in the anger that once consumed him.
But I am your monster no longer.
Kratos' past will always be with him. He's beginning to accept that now. But he is now also a new man, no matter what Athena may say. And while he may always struggle with the vices that drove him to become the monster he once was, he has found a new purpose. Where once he was merely a weapon to be wielded by the gods of Olympus or simply by his own rage, now he fights for his son and for his wife's memory. A man who has not found his own driving purpose is easily swayed by outside forces, convinced to use his strength and abilities for whatever objective, fair or foul, is given to him. Men desperately need a purpose, a reason to work, to fight, to live. All self-serving purposes, money, fame, power, and ego, will ultimately leave us feeling empty, dissatisfied, and unhappy. True, lasting happiness can only be found in relationship with others. Genuinely loving another, seeking their happiness and well-being, is the greatest purpose of them all. Kratos has found that now. He may still be the monster who caused unfathomable pain, but he is no longer a mindless beast being played like a marionette by Athena, Ares, and their kin. Instead, Kratos is simply who his son needs him to be. As with all relationships, however, that sort of service has its limits. Unconditional love for one's child is a beautiful thing, but all powerful forces, no matter how inherently good, can be corrupting. Most goods are not ultimate goods. Take, for example, Freya's words to Kratos about her own failings as a mother to her son.
Did I tell you that I have a son, too? At his birth, the runes foretold a needless death. The babe in my arms was so small, so helpless. I knew right then I would do anything to protect him, no matter the sacrifice.
What mother would not do everything in her power to stop her child from suffering and dying needlessly? Isn't that love? Certainly, seeking to protect one's child is admirable and necessary, but survival is not an absolute good. The continuation of life cannot be bought regardless of the price we pay.
Of course, everything I did for myself. I let my needs, my fears, come before what he needed. And I couldn't see his resentment until it was too late.
This is where unconditional love can lead if it is not prudent. While no parent should have to experience the death of their child, the desire to guard and shelter them should be for the child's good, not for the sake of the parent avoiding the pain of losing that beloved child. This sort of altruism is an incredibly high and challenging call, even for a parent, and Kratos is only now taking steps on the path to living up to that ideal. Atreus had always been shielded from Kratos' true nature, and remains unaware of his past, but now that reality has set in, Kratos must accept that he can no longer keep his son in the dark, and thus avoid any chance of repeating the pain he had suffered, the agony he had caused all those years before. Atreus, for his part, and just like about any child, does not want to be sheltered. His first words upon waking from his illness are,
Don't leave without me.
I will not.
For 11 years, Kratos left Atreus out of the perceived need to protect his son from himself. Now, Atreus speaks clearly and directly his need to be with his father, something that had not happened before. We've known all along that Atreus is afraid of losing Kratos, but seeing him speak so readily and hearing Kratos respond with reassurance is just flat out heartwarming. The two have come a long way. However, I need to touch on the concept of fear as a motivator. Kratos and Atreus are both deathly afraid of losing one another, both because they love each other and because father and son have only each other left in this realm. Without each other, they are lost, and that desire to remain whole is a powerful one. Fear and love can certainly coincide, but as mentioned earlier, acting strictly to avoid pain can only backfire in the end. Fear must be tempered and balanced, and we must be afraid of the right things for the right reasons.
Why would Odin trap you in Midgard?
Petty cruelty would be reason enough for him. But as with all his rash decisions, he's driven by fear.
What is Odin afraid of, according to Freya? Almost certainly, he is afraid of losing his power and control over the 9 realms. Those in authority frequently seek to cement their dominance by any means necessary, especially in mythological stories meant to teach us a thing or two about good and evil. Additionally, kings and rulers tend to see assassins in every shadow and swords dangling by a thread above their thrones. When power becomes one's purpose, one's very reason for living, the thought of losing even a sliver of it is incomprehensible. And so, despite their strength, tyrants such as Odin live in a constant state of terror, dreading the moment when it will all slip away and leave them powerless and destitute with nothing left to live for. The pursuit of power for its own sake or for one's own glorification is a great evil, and a vice that we see Atreus begin to slip toward as Kratos reveals their shared true nature to him. One of the hallmarks of good storytelling is that it does not feel the need to have characters grow and change at the same rate or at the same time. While Kratos and Atreus largely experience the same events, they each have their unique perspective and thus are affected in different ways.
I'm a god, boy. From another land far from here. When I came to these shores, I chose to live as a man. But the truth is, I was born a god. And so were you.
For Kratos, this is a moment of release, letting go of a secret long held in, knowing the danger inherent with accepting godhood, but also now acknowledging the need for his son to know who he really is, even if that past may bring pain to them both. For Atreus, who sees with the eyes of a child, this moment is quite different. It is one of empowerment. He does not understand all the implications that come with being a god. How could he? He hasn't been taught them. Instead, he sees godhood as an elevation of his status, a sign that he is capable of more than he ever thought, and a license to act as he sees fit.
Can I turn into an animal?
Can you turn into an animal? No. No, I do not think so.
This moment is undoubtedly hilarious, and I love how Kratos doesn't dismiss Atreus' silly questions out of hand. I mean, they're not really silly. This is Greek/North mythology after all. There's much weirder stuff than turning into animals in those stories. More importantly, this exchange highlights what can happen when power, even just perceived power, is thrust upon one who hasn't yet developed the maturity to understand the responsibility that comes with that strength. Simply put, it goes to one's head.
We don't have to go right back to Kersval, do we? I mean, we're gods. We can do whatever we want, right?
Before, Atreus' questions to Kratos about what should we do next were couched in a desire to explore and wonder for the world around them. Now he relishes in their nature and the authority he assumes that it brings.
I wish I had known I was a god in Alfheim. I wouldn't have felt so bad about killing so many elves.
Well, I'm not sure that's the lesson.
We had god things to do, and they were in the way, dragging us into their little problems.
Again, are we just leaving that there?
What's most interesting about this scene is not just that Atreus' ego and sense of self-importance are inflated. As already noted, those are expected when one so young is told he is more than a mere mortal. Instead, I find it intriguing that Mimir, not Kratos, is the one who responds to Atreus' arrogant comments.
I mean, just knowing we're gods makes me feel so much stronger.
Maybe you feel a little too good right now. With power comes a big choice, lad. You can either serve yourself or put your godhood in the service of others, like Tyr did.
It's a bit odd, isn't it, that Kratos mostly stays silent here? This seems to be the very thing he feared, his son getting entangled in the world of gods, becoming obsessed with his own power, and being overly certain he is justified in whatever he does, simply because he is not mortal.
I'm a god.
And yet, he lets Mimir do the talking. Why? I would suggest that Kratos simply does not feel ready to respond to his son's words, in part because he deems himself an unworthy teacher in this field. The boasts of Atreus are nothing compared to the sins of Kratos, so maybe he is not so ready to remove the speck out of his son's eye when his own eyes are still quite full of lumber. Likely, the words of Athena still ring in his ears, and his fear of the truth in them holds back his tongue. Kratos also simply isn't the kind of man who offers wisdom at the drop of a hat. He's the strong, silent type, more comfortable leading by example. Actions come to him far more naturally than words do. However, he still does try. One of the most poignant scenes in the story happens shortly after Atreus' inflated ego first makes an appearance, as Kratos attempts to impress upon him the weight that his godhood brings.
So I'm a man now, like you?
No. We are not men. We are more than that. The responsibility is far greater.
Everywhere I go, I hear his voice.
Great power comes great responsibility.
Seriously though, there's a reason this sentiment exists in so many stories about superheroes, Greek gods, or whatever beings you may have who are beyond normal human ken. Masculinity is so often tied to strength, since size, bone density, and muscle mass, and the confidence and assertiveness they often bring, are some of the most significant differentiators that set men and women apart. Toxic masculinity, failed masculinity, or just being an asshole, whichever term you prefer, occurs when men use those advantages to their advantage, using their strength to serve themselves. The stronger you are, the more good or harm you can do with that strength. To him whom much is given, much will be expected. This is the wisdom Kratos now feels ready to impart to his son, connecting with him, physically getting on his level to look him in the eye as he would an equal.
And you must be better than me. Understand? Say it.
You will be better.
The inflated ego wants to be the best, to feel superior, to look down on others. The humble spirit acknowledges its strengths but also its weaknesses, and the humble man wants to teach his son how to be better than he was. This is not done out of pride or the desire for family legacy, but out of genuine love. Kratos' challenge is also encouraging and heartfelt. Despite being forced to reveal to Atreus the dangerous truth, he still hopes that his son can understand the responsibility he now carries in a way Kratos did not for far too long.
Power of this weapon, any weapon, comes from here. But only when tempered by this. By the discipline, the self-control of the one who wields it. That is where the true strength of a warrior lies.
It's a beautiful scene, a wonderful moment of connection between father and son. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite take. With the journey nearing its end, at least that's what Kratos believes, again, and having passed his hard-won wisdom to his son, Kratos shares a lovely moment bonding with Atreus over some well-aged wine. But then, as Atreus begins to question his father's origin, we see that the kid's ego is still very much not in check.
You only killed those deserving, right?
Yes.
Ah, but who's worthy enough to judge?
Quiet, head. We are. We know better.
Character arcs are not smooth rides. Well, most of the great ones aren't anyway. The journeys that our favorite characters undergo should be full of ups and downs, bumps in the roads, and deviations from the path. The trials and errors that characters encounter during their stories make their redemption, or the fulfillment of their potential, that much more satisfying. If his arc was constant and unwavering, Atreus would take his father's words to heart and be judicious in his speech. But, he's 11. He's fine with the idea of responsibility, but hasn't really gotten it into his head that having the mandate to carry out great deeds does not automatically bring with it the proper judgment to know which deeds should be carried out. And Kratos, for his part, is still holding back.
You only killed those deserving, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a lie. For all his growth to this point, Kratos is still not fully humble, not yet ready to admit his many failings to his son. He is still not telling the complete truth, still clinging in part to his ways of secrecy and sheltering, hoping that he can spare his son the pain of truly knowing his father. Which is unfortunate because without that knowledge... Actually, hold that thought because I want to highlight a little bit of storytelling.
I think I'm gonna like being a god.
This is the first time we see the roles reversed. Kratos wants to take a moment with his son, connecting and bonding as their journey nears its end, but Atreus is so caught up in himself and his quest that he completely misses his father's gesture and runs off to turn into an insufferable little twerp. And there's not much to stop him because, as I just said, his father isn't being entirely forthcoming.
I can tell you a thing or two about family matters.
Let me guess. Your brother isn't as talented as you, and his work is junk.
Those things are accurate. Your point?
It's all you ever talk about, over and over. Do something about it or shut up already.
I see.
Yeah! We're sick of hearing about little people's little problems!
All right. That hurt a little.
Earlier, I touched on Atreus' youth and inexperience making him vulnerable to the allure of power, but there's more to it than that. As we've seen throughout the story, Atreus has suffered from a chronic sickness that has left him weak and frail and thus feeling incapable, insufficient, and powerless. When the boy who has felt that way for so long is suddenly thrust a great deal of power and authority, it is no wonder that his newfound godhood causes Atreus to act so pompously. Atreus swings rapidly from thinking of himself as pathetic and helpless to the other end of the spectrum, fashioning himself rightful judge, jury, and executioner wherever he sees fit. Before, he felt ashamed of his condition, of his fragile nature, but now he is overwhelmed with self-importance. And while shame and pride are opposite ends of a spectrum, they are more closely related than one might think. As Uncle Iroh puts it, pride is not the opposite of shame, but its source. True humility is the only antidote to shame. The prideful person focuses too much on himself, putting his needs ahead of the needs of others. His desires and goals are his ultimate goods. If he is incapable of reaching those objectives or carrying out his given purpose, he wallows in shame, turning in upon himself and closing his heart to anything but the removal of the feeling that makes him feel so small and useless. Only the willingness to accept who we really are can break that cycle of pride and shame. That acceptance need not be a resignation to our vices, but rather a recognition that although we are broken and will have to struggle mightily, we can grow in virtue nonetheless. Atreus was not always overtly prideful. His openness and desire to help others during the early story were genuine. When he saw himself as merely a boy, the needs of others, shipwrecked sailors seeking a final resting place, a husband desiring to speak with his dead wife one final time, as more pressing than the immediate demands of his own quest. Which is all well and good, except now we see that Atreus' shame had kept him down, making him think himself worth less than he truly was, because he could never live up to the standard of his father. Kratos' reluctance to help was never about the problems of others being less than theirs, but rather simply that they were not his problems. He was incredibly pragmatic about it, perhaps to a fault, without being dismissive or needlessly unkind. Pride causes us to act and speak with hostility. The prideful man must assert to those beneath him just how much he despises them and how little they matter to him in order to inflate his own ego and confirm his superiority. And ultimately, pride is the chief vice that leads us to all other vices and a great many evils.
Why did you speak to the dwarf like that?
Aren't you sick of hearing about him and his brother?
Of course. But it serves nothing to make an enemy of him.
You should know the truth, even if it hurts.
It was needless and unkind.
Truth is more important than kindness.
Your mother would disagree.
She wasn't a god.
Oof, I mean, yikes. You see what I mean about pride, right? This was a woman for whom Kratos should have nothing but love and admiration, and yet
she wasn't a god.
At least now Kratos is able to reprimand his son, and he does so sternly but not harshly, condemning the words Atreus spoke, but not the boy himself. And considering Kratos' past, it's certainly a sign of growth to see him reprove Atreus for merely being unkind. I mean, the man who once upon a time did this.
Thank you! Thank the gods you came back for me!
I didn't come back for you.
No!
Or this.
I'm begging you, on your humanity, don't do this, please!
Is admonishing his son for saying mean things. He's come a long way when it comes to restraint, a journey that his son has yet to complete. Atreus' pride reaches its apex when the pair encounters Modi once again, beaten to a pulp by Thor for letting Magni be killed by Kratos and failing to exact revenge.
No. He is beaten. Not worth killing.
He should pay for what he said about Mother.
I said no.
But we're gods. We can do whatever we want.
Pride doesn't just put one's own needs above the good of others, it holds one's wants as a greater good than even the very life of another. Atreus longs for vengeance even for the smallest insult, and since his elevation to godhood has planted in him a sense of supreme self-righteousness, he acts according to his basest desires.
What are you doing?
This is a much better knife than Mother's.
However, the blame for this horrendous act cannot fall squarely and only on Atreus' shoulders.
Haven't you been teaching me to kill?
I've been teaching you to survive.
While Atreus isn't exactly correct as to why some of the responsibility lies with Kratos, he is most certainly correct that his father is in some way responsible for his misdeeds.
Nobody cared about him anyways. What's the difference?
There are consequences to killing a god!
Why? How do you know? How do you know?
Watch your tone, boy.
Again, Kratos does not answer the question. He deflects, demanding the respect of his son instead of responding with honesty. His arc is also far from complete, his humility still developing, his ability to forgive himself not fully present. Even after all this time, Kratos still cannot bring himself to reveal to his son the full truth of his past, and that failing has allowed Atreus to misunderstand the truth that his father has revealed to him. Knowing a partial truth can be more harmful than simply being in the dark. Atreus knows he is a god, and Kratos has told him how great of a responsibility that is, but he has not yet learned that with that responsibility comes the potential for failure on an unimaginable scale. How could he? The man who could teach him that lesson has withheld it from him, and still refuses to share it with him, even though he has just seen the consequences of Atreus' incomplete education on the meaning of being a god.
I've done everything you asked, and all I wanted was the truth. Where did you get your fire blades? Why did you hide them? You said there are consequences to killing a god. You used the blades to kill one. Who else did you kill? Before Magni? How many? Do you hear me?
I heard you, and these are not subjects for discussion. Do not push me, boy.
Once again, this is beautiful storytelling because character arcs are not meant to be arrows pointing straight to greatness. They are full of plateaus and depressions that stall or undo progress as characters make mistakes and fail over and over. I said a few minutes ago that Atreus' pride peaked at the murder of Modi. Well, I might have misspoken, because when father and son reach the Midgard peak, things really come to their breaking point. Literally. Kratos straight up shatters the portal to Jotunheim by body slamming Baldur into it. That honestly feels a bit contrived, which is a rarity for this story. Dude, the ground was right there, you didn't have to aim for the big pillar, but hey, maybe it's meant to be a lesson in the dangers of anger. Kratos certainly isn't immune to seeing red and getting lost in his own rage, even now. But more importantly, this fight is where Atreus loses himself in his anger, driven by his pride.
Run, boy! Cross the bridge!
No! I'm a god too! I can do this! Get off him!
Really?
Showing courage in the face of danger is commendable, but Atreus is now instead displaying bravado, an unearned confidence created not by reality, but by his own ego. And that same ego will not let him back down, even when it's readily apparent that he can have no effect on this fight.
Get out of here, boy.
Yes, by all means, Junior, run away. Let Daddy do all the heavy lifting for you.
Let go!
Calm down, boy. You are not ready for this.
I am ready!
This is what pride, unconstrained and untempered, can do. It puts what I want right now, in this moment, above all other concerns. Atop the highest peak in the realm, Atreus and Kratos are at the lowest point in their relationship, as Kratos' failings as a teacher and father combine with his son's immaturity and pride, causing Atreus to very nearly repeat his own father's deadliest sin. Where do they go from here? How can they heal from the wound that their relationship has just been dealt? To Kratos' credit, he doesn't hesitate in the slightest when chasing after Baldur and the captured Atreus. His son may be unrecognizable, but he is still his son. Kratos does not just abandon his duty because Atreus has rejected his. He still loves him and would readily die to save him. That doesn't mean Kratos will go easy on Atreus, nor should he. The anger he displays in Helheim is much closer to righteous anger than the anger he showed at the beginning of the story.
I am your father, and you, boy, are not yourself. You are too quick to temper. You are rash, insubordinate, and out of control. This will not stand.
Too quick to temper, rash, insubordinate, and out of control, you say. Sound like anyone you know? Our own vices are the ones we most easily recognize. That is, if we have relatively good self-awareness. Kratos has never lacked that quality. He just has had, and still does have, a problem with self-acceptance and self-forgiveness. But oh, does he ever know his own flaws. But he also knows two other crucial pieces of information.
You will honor your mother and abandon this path you have chosen.
First, Kratos knows Atreus' love for Faye. He knows how much this quest meant to his son, how he would stop at nothing to fulfill her last request. And so he invokes Faye in an attempt to break through Atreus' pride.
It's not too late.
Second, Kratos knows that no matter how many wrong decisions we make, as long as we draw breath, we always have the opportunity for redemption. We can change. We can choose virtue where we had so long given into vice. On both these points, Kratos could be speaking to himself as much as he is to Atreus. To honor his wife, and to truly be a father to his son, he must be better than the man he once was. That kind of growth is not easy or painless. As I will never tire of repeating, we cannot ignore our past if we are to change for the better. We cannot be obsessed or preoccupied with our previous failings, but we simultaneously must accept that we have failed, and that those failures make us stronger, if we are mindful, intentional, and actually strive to learn from them. But it takes time. Healing is slow, and learning to forgive yourself is a painful and arduous process, and the longer you wait to do so, the deeper the wounds are buried, and the more difficult the healing will be.
But we're gods. We can do whatever we want.
Turn away, boy.
Atreus has only recently, that is, today, committed the sins for which he will need to atone. His failings have not had time to ingrain themselves into his psyche. He can see and hear the echoes of his crimes and say,
It wasn't me. I couldn't have done that.
Because for so long, that wasn't him. That reality was a flash in the pan, a momentary fever dream, and snapping out of it can thus be as quick as falling into it was.
Face me, father. It is time to end this.
Yes, my son. It is time.
Kratos, by contrast, has carried his sins with him for many years, reflecting on them, letting them haunt him, never truly able to move past them. Where his son, although shaken by the visions, can quickly dismiss them, Kratos is struck dumb and left paralyzed, only moved to action by Atreus breaking through the literal nightmare. Perhaps now, you might think, Kratos will reveal his past to Atreus. The visions in Helheim have shown too much, surely. There's no reason to hide any longer.
Boy. Before, when you saw.
Kratos is on the brink of letting it all out, finally revealing to Atreus exactly how he knows there are consequences to killing a god, fully unveiling his past and thus truly explaining his present. But
I didn't see anything.
You did not see me with someone. An old man.
What old man?
Atreus is clearly lying. Kratos could see his visions, and they could both see and hear Baldur's, which we'll talk about in a moment. So there's absolutely no reason Atreus could not see his father's vision. But remember, the sins of the father. Kratos has repeatedly and pointedly refused to talk about his past more than absolutely necessary, and those refusals have worn Atreus down, smothering his natural curiosity and desire to learn. That's likely not the only factor. Atreus is not an idiot. He knows what he saw. That is, his dad in the midst of murdering an old man, who Atreus could assume from context
Face me, father!
was Kratos' own father. That's not a truth that any son would readily want to hear from his father, especially a son who so recently almost committed patricide himself. Father and son now share an uncomfortable, unthinkable similarity, one that they would both rather leave unspoken, even though doing so hampers their collective ability to heal and bond. The sins of the father. But let's address that vision that was tormenting Baldur in Helheim, shall we?
Death has no power over you now. You would rather die?
Never see you again? Yes. I would rather die. Yes.
I love it when foreshadowing is paid off. The hints and clues were there, and now the reveal is complete as we discover the origin of Baldur's curse. His invulnerability and the inability to feel pain is not a utilitarian use of magic designed to make him an unstoppable weapon, but rather a motherly gift from one who could not bear the thought of her son suffering and dying needlessly. That brings us back to this moment.
Pain we endure. Faulty weaponry we do not.
Where fathers tend to accept pain as a part of life, as something to be endured and pushed through, mothers are far more sensitive to their children's pain and seek to prevent it. A dad might roughhouse with his kids, leading to one of them getting a bump or a jolt that was a bit too rough, and that's when the mother swoops in to save the day. I imagine this scenario plays out roughly 8 million times a day across the world. Heck, Bluey made an entire episode about it. Yeah, bet you didn't expect me to reference that in a God of War video. Neither of those roles or tendencies is inherently better than the other. Both are necessary and good depending on the situation, and both must be properly tempered with prudence and right judgment. A father might ask too much of his children, and a mother might pay too high a price for her child's safety.
She only hoped to spare him pain and spare herself loss. But such impulses can lead good parents to make terribly stupid decisions.
Motherly love is beautiful in its ferocity, but when not balanced, it can be controlling and indulgent. The well-being of a child is undoubtedly a good, indeed a very high good, for which parents can and should sacrifice, but it is not an ultimate good. Freya learned that lesson, but not until it was too late. By contrast, Faye knew that Atreus needed more than simple survival. She was aware of her son's nature. He and Kratos could have simply persisted in their hidden home with nothing but the elements to bother them for as long as they desired, being immortal and all that. But Faye knew both father and son would need far more than that. To truly live, not just survive, they would need to come to know and understand one another. By having Kratos remove the trees that held together the protection stave, Faye essentially forced her husband to finally take up his fatherly duty and carry out her final wish. Yes, the journey that they would embark on would certainly be dangerous, but Faye understood that. The safety of her son was not all important to her. Rather, she desired most that he have a real relationship with his father, that the two love and protect each other.
Wish Mom was here to see it.
Love can never be self-indulgent. Where love exists, so does the potential for pain. We have to be vulnerable to be authentic and genuine in our love. Refusing to open ourselves up to the possibility of sorrow and grief simply closes our heart to true, self-giving love. Ultimately, this is a concept that Kratos comes to understand. To be fair to Freya, she seems to as well, at least to some extent, but her realization only comes well after the damage is already done.
Of course, everything I did for myself. I let my needs, my fears, come before what he needed.
This brings us to the game's final battles. The physical conflict between Kratos and Baldur, the emotional struggle of Baldur and Freya, and of course, Kratos finally conquering his own fear of his past for the sake of his son. In Baldur, we see what Atreus could become if his father were to refuse to acknowledge the full truth of who he was, causing his son to resent Kratos for holding back, needlessly protecting him, not trusting him to have the strength to handle the truth.
I've spent the last 100 years dreaming of this moment. I rehearsed everything I ever wanted to say to you, every word, to make you understand exactly what you stole from me.
If left to fester, some wounds become seemingly impossible to heal. After a century of constant torment inflicted upon him by his mother, Baldur simply does not have forgiveness within him. We saw earlier in Helheim that he was not always quite like this. The vision of Baldur there stops short of killing his mother, even as present-day Baldur urges his past self to carry out the deed. Perhaps there was a time when Freya could have broken the curse and received her son's forgiveness, but that time is now long gone. However, Kratos does not accept the idea that Baldur's fate is chosen for him, that he must act according to how he now feels.
This path you walk, vengeance, you will find no peace. I know.
We always have a choice. Maybe Baldur cannot find in him the peace needed to forgive his mother, but choosing to kill her is another step entirely. Kratos knows this. He has learned that lesson through unspeakable pain. It's an important recognition for all of us. Even if we cannot attain the highest good, due to something lacking within us, we can choose a lesser good, or at the very least, choose to not do evil. No matter our past, our pains, and our traumas, we always have a choice. Who we were yesterday does not dictate what we must do today. Acknowledging this and striving to live up to this ideal is the only way we can grow and change. Being better than who we were remains a constant theme throughout this story, even in the little moments that we might miss if we dare to blink. When Kratos is trapped by Freya's magic, defenseless against an approaching Baldur, Atreus simply stands his ground. Where once he recklessly charged at the invulnerable Aesir god, his pride and ego driving him forward, he now simply states,
I won't let you hurt him!
That's love right there. And since this is a mythical tale with a moral, doing the right thing and acting out of selfless love tends to pay off in fantastic ways.
No! Atreus! You're bleeding. Breathe, boy. Breathe!
Not my blood.
I wanted to show this scene because one, it's just plain stunning, and two, it highlights a fact we know from earlier. Freya hates mistletoe. She hates it because she knows what it is capable of. Now, I'm not sure how long she was aware of its power. In the original myth, Baldur's mother does not seem to be aware of Mistletoe's refusal to promise not to harm her son, and so doesn't stop Loki from fashioning the spear used to kill Baldur. Wait, Loki breaks the spell of Baldur's invulnerability? Point being, Freya knew how to remove the curse that her son so badly wanted to be rid of. Had her love for him not been self-indulgent, had she not been more afraid of her own pain than of him not being whole, perhaps she could have sought him out and granted him his wish before it was too late, before his resentment took permanent hold. But to the end, Baldur's survival and the defeat of the prophecy regarding his death remained Freya's ultimate and highest goal, which of course backfires completely. But not yet.
He's beaten, Father. Not a threat.
I was getting a bit ahead of myself. This line from Atreus, of course, echoes the lesson his father tried to teach him earlier.
No. He is beaten. Not worth killing.
Violence, like love, must never be self-indulgent. Really, no action should be. Self-indulgence is a manifestation of pride, of seeking one's own desires regardless of circumstance or the needs of others. Restraint is one of the most necessary traits for the strong. It is only through temperance and self-control that power can be used for good. However, that doesn't mean you can't let loose and kick ass every once in a while. Let this be your reminder that you are watching a video essay about a video game about Greek and Norse gods. There's going to be some phenomenally spectacular action taking place. And this is probably as awesome as one can feel during a QuickTime event. Really, it's just so satisfying to see Kratos and Atreus working in harmony, to witness father and son coming together as a team, the fluidity of their actions demonstrating the bond that they have formed over the course of their journey. But that journey has not quite ended yet. Kratos and Atreus have several steps to take, starting with this one.
If seeing me dead will make things right, I won't stop you.
Why? Why do you even care? You could have walked away.
The cycle ends here.
So much is packed into these few seconds. Freya's failure as a mother, her overwhelming zeal to protect Baldur, ends up costing her the very son she sought to shelter from harm.
At his birth, the runes foretold a needless death.
Prophecies in fantasy certainly have a way of coming true no matter how hard characters work to prevent them, don't they? Then we have Kratos breaking the cycle, proclaiming,
The cycle ends here. Must be better than this.
In those few words, he acknowledges his role in that cycle of violence, accepting it as a part of his past, but refusing to let it restrain his growth any longer. And finally, as the light fades from Baldur's eyes, 2 flakes of snow land and melt on his cheeks. Even in his dying moments, Baldur is taking joy in feeling, reveling in the sensation that was stolen from him, relishing being alive even as his survival comes to its end. Simply living can never take priority over life itself, with all the pains and sufferings that may accompany it. This is the lesson that Kratos has been absorbing throughout the story, and one he is finally ready to pass on in fullness to Atreus.
You were just an animal. Passing on your cruelty and rage, you will never change.
And you do not know me.
I know enough. Does he?
We hear in Freya's agonized words an echo of Athena's accusation.
You cannot change. You will always be a monster.
What's remarkable is not that the two goddesses cannot see the change that has in fact happened within Kratos. Whether they knew him or just knew of him, their perceptions were going to be fixed and static. We do not change our view of someone as easily as they change themselves, and growth largely happens within the human heart, invisible to those who do not truly know us. No, the remarkable thing is that Kratos does not try to convince Freya. Letting someone believe awful things about you, allowing them to perceive your righteous actions through a spiteful lens, takes incredible maturity and humility. Kratos knows that trying to sway Freya's opinion of him would be futile and pointless. Instead, he turns to his son, finally ready to brave whatever pain the truth of his past may bring.
Boy, listen close. I'm from a land called Sparta. I made a deal with the god that cost me my soul. I killed many who were deserving. And many who were not.
It's a poignant, moving speech, Kratos opening up who he was to Atreus, trusting that his son, who has come to know who he is now, will not abandon him, decrying his own father as a monster. But there is one final, unimaginable truth that must be revealed, and for this, Kratos must turn to face Atreus. Nothing can be held back, not even the pain present on this Spartan warrior's face as he admits his gravest sin.
I killed my father.
Zeus usurped, imprisoned, and enslaved his father Kronos. Kratos murdered Zeus. Atop the Midgard peak, Atreus loosed an arrow into his father's chest. These gods are, by definition, incredibly powerful beings, and power is one of, if not the, most corruptive forces in existence. The temptation to use strength and authority for one's own desires is far too much for so many. It's no surprise then that some of the greatest and most virtuous leaders in history were thrust into their positions of power rather than seeking it out for themselves. Those who covet power tend to be the least deserving of it. But power, even supreme power, need not be a curse.
Is this how it always ends? Sons killing their mothers? Their fathers?
No. We will be the gods we choose to be. Not those who have been. Who I was is not who you be. We must be better.
We always have a choice. The past informs us, shapes us, and deeply affects us, but it does not define our futures. As long as we draw breath, we have the ability to grow and change, to seek redemption, and to forgive others. This process is never easy, and the road to healing and wholeness will never be smooth, but humility, mercy, especially for ourselves, and selfless love make it possible for even the worst of us to become better teachers, better husbands, better fathers, better men. One final thing before we move on to Jotunheim and the end of our story. I touched on the music of this story very briefly near the beginning of this video, and I'd like to do so again now. Have a listen.
I'm from a land called Sparta. I made a deal with the god that cost me my soul. We will be the gods we choose to be. Not those who have been.
I can hardly express how much I love the transition from the deep, almost harsh chorus of Kratos' motif to the soft, tender violins of Faye's. The music in this scene speaks of healing, of acknowledging the past but moving beyond it to a better future. The musical themes are in perfect accord with the themes of the story, to the point where even a musical plebeian like me can recognize them, and that's just plain awesome. But now,
we should finish this journey while I still have strength.
Any good story knows how to provide an emotionally satisfying ending, even after the action and character development are done. The audience or the player needs to see the reward for all the pain and struggle that our heroes have gone through. For some 20 hours now, depending how long it takes you to play through the campaign, we have watched Kratos struggle with his past, failing repeatedly to reconcile who he was with who he is, with who he wants his son to be. This massive Spartan warrior was so afraid that his sins would always stay with him and be passed on to his son that he distanced himself from the boy who desperately needed a father. Only through the wishes of his late wife is he able to embark on the journey that forces him, step by arduous step, to embrace the painful reality of his past, to forgive himself for the unimaginable, and to resolve to be better for the sake of his son. Now that all of that has happened.
What are you doing?
I have nothing more to hide.
What an incredible release for all the emotion that is built up throughout the story. This is genuine humility, accepting and acknowledging that we are flawed and broken men, but we always have the ability to grow if only we accept the lessons, however painful, that our past might teach us.
Can we go now? We're so close.
I love how Atreus is just like, Dad, stay focused. Kids don't have the perspective of adults, obviously, and I appreciate how much Atreus just remains a kid throughout the game, regardless of all the incredibly messed up stuff that he witnesses. And yet, he has grown and changed so much, going from weak, frail, and nearly helpless to a raging egomaniac drunk in his own perceived power, to a humble yet capable boy whose selfless love for and fierce devotion to his father proves to be the difference between victory and defeat. He has earned this.
Boy. Carry her.
Faye, of course, is the reason for all of this. She was the target of Baldur's hunt. Her last wishes sent Kratos and Atreus on their journey, and her wisdom in doing so becomes even clearer as father and son reach the room that foretold their journey. Though he never knew these prophecies existed, Kratos followed his wife's final request nonetheless, out of love and respect, yes, but also out of trust. Love is a two-way street. One spouse wills the good of the other and trusts that the same selfless desire is reciprocated. For all his failings, Kratos never doubted the goodness of Faye's heart nor the power of her mind. However much he may have desired to remain safe and hidden, he accepted that his wife might know better what he needed than he did, because he knew she loved him, despite all his flaws and failings. What gives this scene weight is not just the implications for the future of Kratos and Atreus, but how it paints the beginning of the story in a new light, recoloring our view of the entire saga as events that are not merely significant because of the bond they created, but for the impact that they will have, that Faye and her kin knew they must have, on the future of all the realms. But that story is not told here. Instead, our tale ends as it should, with Faye's last wish finally accomplished.
Father?
No. We do it together. Son.
You knew it had to happen. After 1,000 iterations of, boy, this moment was inevitable, and yet it's still so poignant, beautiful, and satisfying. Affection from a parent is such a natural and normal thing, and yet from the reserved and reluctant Kratos, it means so much more.
Goodbye, Faye.
I love you, Mom.
And yet, with the end of every story comes the potential for a new one.
My name on the wall. The Giants called me... Loki?
Loki. That's the name your mother wanted for you when you were born. She must have called you that to her people.
I wanted to play that because what follows is one of my favorite scenes of the whole game. Faye wanted to name her son Loki, perhaps in accordance with the prophecies, but Kratos desired Atreus for the name, and now we find out why.
So, why'd you want to name me Atreus? I know it can't be for a god.
No. He was a soldier. A Spartan.
A great warrior?
All Spartans are great warriors. We trained from birth. Our lives were discipline, duty, battle, and death. Life was grim, and we greeted it grimly. But Atreus of Sparta was unlike the rest of us. He wore a smile even in the worst of times. He was happy. He inspired us to hope that though we were machines of war, yet there was humanity in us. Goodness. When the day came for him to lay down his life in battle, his sacrifice saved countless others and turned the tide in our favor. I carried him home on his shield and buried him with all the honors of Spartan custom. His memory was a comfort in dark times.
The overarching theme that dominates this story is simply be better. Be better than you were yesterday. Be better than your sins tell you you are. Be better for the sake of those you love. The Spartan Atreus was better. He saw more in life than the grim reality of violence, blood, and death. In him, the dour Kratos, who once proclaimed,
"In war, a soldier sees beauty only in the blood of his enemy,"
is able to see beauty in life itself. Kratos did not name his son after himself or even some great noble figure, but rather after a truly good man, a man whose example of ultimate sacrifice is a model for how to live, an example he hopes his son will follow. We can be better. Through learning to temper our passion and anger with patience and prudence, humbly accepting our faults and sins along with our virtues, growing in relationship with those who need us and whom we need, and persisting in the hope of redemption, we can be better. The masculinity Kratos displays is not just through his raw physical power, but more through his rejection of the urge to use that power for himself, through the lessons he imparts and the relationship he forms with Atreus, and most of all, through his gradual, painful growth in virtue as he strives in every moment to be better. That is what this incredible, beautiful story that reaches deep into our hearts is all about. This was an incredibly ambitious undertaking for me. I enjoyed this story when I first experienced it, and upon going back and re-examining it, I found more and more just how wonderful it really is, how meaningful every cutscene is, and I fell in love with the saga of Kratos and Atreus. I wanted to leave out as little as possible, hence this video being twice the length of any other on my channel. If you made it all the way here, just know that I am so grateful you took the time to do so. I genuinely love talking about these sorts of topics and will certainly continue to do so. Whether or not future videos are of similar length depends entirely on how much I have to say on the matter. But what I have resolved to do going forward is not cut my videos shorter for the sake of sticking to a schedule. As long as my content still resonates with you good nerds, I will create what I want to create in the manner that I desire, even if that completely borks any semblance of an upload schedule, and thus the algorithm comes to hate me. So, no idea when the next video is coming out, nor even what it will be. I've got ideas for Andor, Theoden, Spider-Man 2, and Breath of the Wild all jostling around in my head, so we'll see what wins out. Thank you again for watching, and whenever it may be, I will see you in the next one.